Hi everyone, my name is Mary and I really appreciate you allowing me some time to give you an update on the Crown-of-Thorns Starfish Control Program, and particularly I'll give you some details on the ongoing expansion of the program today. But before I do that, I wanted to give you a little bit of background on the starfish and outbreaks in the control program in order to inform and give you that perspective. So Crown-of-Thorns starfish, or COTS as we call them for short, are native to Australian waters, so they're not an introduced or exotic species. They're really voracious coral predators, which is what makes them a pest. So an adult starfish can eat up to 250 centimeters square of coral per day. They prefer plate and branching corals, and in doing so, we think they help maintain the balance in coral communities between slow-growing and fast-growing coral species. These guys also have really high reproductive potential, so their females produce up to 65 million eggs per spawning season, and that season runs between December and February. Another important part of their ecology when it comes to controlling them is that they're very cryptic, and so they hide in the reef during the day and are mainly active at night. And there's still a lot we don't know about their basic ecology and population dynamics, particularly what is going on with these guys at their early juvenile phases. So that's a really important part of the puzzle to learn more about so we can effectively control them on the reef. So there have been 4 major recorded outbreaks of Crown-of-Thorns starfish on the Great Barrier Reef since the 1960s. And all of these have started in this region here offshore from the wet tropics catchment on reefs between Lizard Island and Cairns. So the outbreaks have started approximately every 15 to 17 years, with the current outbreak that we're now starting in that initiation zone or initiation box in 2010. So they initiate there, and then they spread through waves of secondary outbreaks down the reef. They also spread upwards to some extent as well. And that spread is mainly through transport of their larvae on ocean currents. So this timeline here shows that outbreaks persist somewhere along the Great Barrier Reef for a period of about 10 to 12 years, which means that most of the time over the past 4 decades, there have been some reefs along the length of the Great Barrier Reef with outbreaks. And over these outbreaks, there's been a significant progress in our understanding of them and the methods we use to control those outbreaks, and also our perspective on whether we should intervene. And I'll also note that there are separate outbreaks that happen in the Swains at the very far southern end of the Great Barrier Reef, and we consider these to be have separate dynamics and patterns to the ones I'm describing here. So one of the big questions is what causes these outbreaks? Well, it's really multiple factors working together. So their high fecundity, so their life history characteristics of the critter really play a role. The fact that they grow and reach reproductive maturity really quickly all lends itself to having a boom and bust life cycle. The availability of food at both the larval stage and the adult stage also helps determine whether outbreaks will occur. Reductions in their natural predators plays a role, and the unique circulation patterns of the region where the outbreaks initiate also plays a role. So it's multiple factors working together. It's not just one single driver. Now, one thing we've learned over the past 40 years through the research is there's quite a bit of evidence now that human activities actually exacerbate outbreaks. So this research from the Australian Institute of Marine Science shows that increases in nutrients can dramatically enhance COTS larval survival. In addition, removal of the predators of COTS through fishing also exacerbates outbreaks. This research from also the Australian Institute of Marine Science shows that outbreaks are much more frequent on reefs that are open to fishing compared to those that are closed to fishing. So this is because lots of fish on the reef eat COTS at some point in their life cycle. So it's not just the giant triton snail that eats the adult COTS. Things like emperor and pufferfish eat juvenile COTS, and even things like smaller fish like damselfish and wrasses eat COTS larvae. So this research suggests that having these natural food webs intact is really important in suppressing the buildup of COTS populations to outbreak levels. Another important area of progress over the past 40 years has been in the development of control methods. So you see here in the late 60s, an electric shotgun was trialed that was meant to be used by divers underwater to shock the starfish. And this news article shows Dr. Robert Indian saying he hopes to test the secret weapon on Moreton Bay starfish early next week. And that one of the hardest factors to overcome with that method was the need for absolute waterproofing to protect divers from being electrocuted. So not an ideal method at that early stage. In the 80s and 90s, methods like cutting up starfish and using underwater fencing to keep them out were trialed with pretty limited success. Cutting starfish up also actually just creates more starfish, so it doesn't really help the problem, but we learned that along the way. We also tried injections of things like copper sulfate, so toxic chemicals that, while effective at killing starfish, also increase the levels of toxic chemicals in the environment. So subsequently, we developed injections of non-toxic sodium bisulfate, and they were effective at killing the starfish, but they required 25 injections per individual starfish. Now, during the course of this current outbreak, several new injection methods have been developed that are both non-toxic and environmentally friendly, and these kill starfish with a single shot injection, which makes them really efficient at controlling, the most efficient method we've had to date. And of course, we all know that these outbreaks can be really damaging to the reef. COTS outbreaks are identified as a major driver of coral decline on the Great Barrier Reef, adding to the impacts from coral bleaching and cyclones. So there's really strong motivation for us to mitigate the damage from these outbreaks, because it's one of the things that we can actually manage through local action in the marine park. So, spurred on by our better understanding of the links between outbreaks and human activities and the development of those feasible control methods, the first broad-scale government-funded COTS control program began in 2012. The Association of Marine Park Tourism Operators, or AMTO, has really been an important part of this program from its very beginning. During those early years of the program, they operated one and for a short time also a second vessel, and they were really focused on controlling COTS at tourism sites on reefs between Lizard Island and Cairns in that initiation zone. Oh, excuse me. In 2015, the Reef and Rainforest Research Center joined the program and introduced an integrated pest management approach, so introducing research to help inform the control efforts. And at that stage, the program still had one vessel and was focusing on controlling COTS on 21 priority reefs between Port Douglas and Cairns. In January 2017, we were able to add a second vessel to the program and also expand the geographic scope of our control efforts as the outbreak spread south towards Townsville. And at that point, 57 reefs in total, so 21 from Port Douglas to Cairns and an additional 36 between Cairns and Townsville, were prioritized for control. And now we're in the process of expanding the program to have up to 7 vessels at the end of this financial year. So this means that we'll have new vessel operators and crews joining the program, and we'll be able to control COTS on more high-value reefs across the whole length of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, and I'll tell you more about that soon. So this expansion of the program most recently occurred in response to the back-to-back bleaching events in 2016 and 2017, which really lit the fire amongst reef stakeholders to do more to protect coral on the Great Barrier Reef. And this vision was captured in our Blueprint for Resilience, in which a wide range of reef experts and stakeholders identified ramping up COTS control as one of the most feasible on-ground actions to reduce rates of coral decline on the Great Barrier Reef. So off the back of that, the federal government has since committed over $80 million to ramping up COTS control on the Great Barrier Reef. Now, this funding provides for the expansion of the control program with more vessels and trained crews able to operate over a wider geographic range in the marine park. And it also provides funding for increased surveillance and monitoring of the effectiveness of the program. So, the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority's COTS policy states that if the impacts to the environment are significant and there are links to human activities, the authority should use all its powers and influence to regulate those activities and minimize the effects of outbreaks. And that is reflected in the Australian government's Reef 2050 plan. So for COTS, our management actions include improving water quality, enforcing and maintenance of marine park zoning that directly protects the predators of COTS, and finally, the front line in the battle, direct population control program through this strategic culling, which I'll tell you about in more detail now. So in terms of control, we recognize that there are different stages of management action during an outbreak. So COTS management needs to be adaptive and dynamic during these stages of an outbreak. So the objectives, the intensity, and where we allocate our resources would really change depending on what point in the outbreak we're in. And currently, we're in the protect phase. So our current control program is really focused right now on protecting assets rather than preventing an outbreak or containing the spread of an outbreak. So our goal is to use the best available science in order to protect coral. And we do that by strategically targeting the program to cull COTS at ecologically and economically valuable reefs in the marine park. So these are the coral assets, the ecological assets, the coral reefs that spread coral larvae to many other reefs. And those economic assets, including those really high-value tourism sites. And then we cull COTS numbers down on those reefs by bringing them down to ecologically sustainable levels that enable coral growth to outpace starfish feeding. And I want to make the point that our goal in this program isn't to completely eradicate COTS in the marine park or to rack up big cull numbers, contrary to what you might hear in the media. So just like any pest management program, we need to be focused and provide consistent and repeated treatment in order to keep pest levels down, just like weeding your garden. And although we certainly are going to have more vessels than ever before, we still have to be strategic about how we allocate our resources, given there are over 3,000 reefs in the marine park. So we choose priority reefs to focus our efforts, and we consider a range of information to identify those priority reefs, including connectivity modeling predictions, which combine the characteristics of coral and COTS larvae with the hydrodynamic forces that move them along the reef, as well as tourism visitation data and our knowledge of coral cover and COTS outbreak status provided through surveillance in the water in the field. And so all of these things help us focus our efforts to ensure that resources are allocated where they'll make the biggest impact on the resilience of the reef and the industries it supports. And our partners in the field management program have a critical role in providing the field data that informs our strategic planning and implementation of the control program. So the Marine Park Rangers are delivering 70 to 90 days per year of targeted field surveys of COTS numbers and coral cover. And we use that data to create these maps of coral cover and COTS numbers that you see here. And this helps us decide, track the severity and extent of outbreaks as they develop, and decide where to allocate our effort. So for example, late last year we'd received reports of high COTS numbers on reefs in the Swains, which is at the far southern end of the Great Barrier Reef. We received these reports from commercial fishermen, Marine Park Rangers, all through our Eye on the Reef sightings network. And so using that increased funding for the program, we were able to send Marine Park Rangers out to assess that situation. And they surveyed 76 reefs at the far southern end of the Swains and found that, in fact, 90% of them, they confirmed, had outbreaks. And while they were out there, they were also able to do some first responder culling and injected 41,000 COTS from 3 of those outbreaking reefs. So based on that information, we were also concerned about the potential for those outbreaks in the Swains to spread to reefs in the Capricorn Bunker group. So we sent some rangers to assess that situation in the Capricorn Bunkers in June. And it was really good to learn from the rangers that the 9 reefs they surveyed didn't have outbreaks, and coral cover on those reefs was in really good shape. So that's something we'll keep monitoring into the future. So our next planned surveillance efforts will focus on the mid and upper Swains in this region where we don't have any information to go on. So this kind of information really important for informing the control program. So as you've heard, we're collecting a lot of data through this program. So we could collect data on culling, manto surveillance, and reef health and impact. And this data lives in our Eye on the Reef database, and we use this COTS dashboard you see here to visually display and synthesize that data in order to make informed management decisions. So you can see here on the map panel, you see the circles over individual reefs, and the color of those circles indicating what their outbreak status. So the green circles indicate no outbreak, and the yellow, orange, and red circles indicate various stages of outbreak, from potential outbreak, it's not full-blown yet, but it's numbers of COTS are increasing, to active outbreak, and to really severe outbreak. And on the right-hand side of your screen, you can also see how we're able to track trends in catch per unit effort, so culling effort over time, and trends in coral cover over time at the places where we're doing the management action. So that's all really important to inform the expansion of the COTS control program. So as this program expands, for logistical planning, we've split the marine park into 5 operational regions, and you all will know where your individual LMACs sit along that coastline. So each of these regions has a port for a vessel, except for the far north, which certainly presents its own logistical difficulties in operation in that remote region. So we're allocating a vessel to each of those regions, and this is a cartoon, I will say. These are not what the vessels actually look like, but our intention is to achieve a network of COTS controlled reefs across the marine park. It doesn't mean that we'll be able to control every reef in each of those regions, but we will control priority reefs in each of those regions. And you'll also notice with the cartoon, we're putting a bit more effort into the regions where we know the highest COTS numbers are. So that region of outbreak front between Cairns and Townsville, and also in the Swains. And now we'll just go through a little bit of detail on what we know about each of these regions. So in the far north, we expect to have one vessel operating in this region, and really we lack recent survey data on COTS numbers and coral cover in this remote area. However, we do have some eye on the reef sightings reports suggesting there are COTS present in significant numbers. So some crayfishermen have reported that they're seeing scattered COTS on reef edges, citing about 100 COTS in 200 minutes of diving. So the vessel working in that region will initially do some surveillance to inform where we focus our control. From Lizard Island to Cairns, we have, as I've explained before, been working in this region for a long time, since the start of the control program. So 21 high-value reefs in this region have been controlled for COTS since 2013. So we've controlled and culled over 4,000 COTS in that region. And as you can see with the green circles on the map, those reefs are all being controlled to sustainable levels, so no outbreak levels, and are being maintained that way by regular visits to maintain that with a control vessel. And we do have, we're very well aware and have in our minds that this is the initiation zone for the next major outbreak. So we know this area requires extra special proactive surveillance and monitoring into the future. So in the Cairns to Townsville region, as I've noted, that's the region of outbreak front and an area where we have a lot of survey data from the control vessels that operate there and also from the field management program rangers. Those 36 high-value reefs in the region that were currently prioritized for control and have been actioned since 2017, over 3,600,000 COTS have been culled from those reefs, and 50% of those priority reefs are now being managed below at sustainable levels of COTS numbers, and we still require work to cull down those remaining COTS on those other priority reefs. We do action other non-priority reefs in the region when we have time and resource capacity. But currently there are essentially 2 vessels operating throughout this region, and we recognize that we're going to put some additional effort into this region as the program expands. So Townsville to Mackay, we have relatively limited data on outbreak status of reefs in this region, aside from offshore Townsville mainly is what we have information on. And we recognize this is a potential area of outbreak spread based on the current outbreak front to the north. And we also have in our minds that this is, has really critical tourism hotspots in this region, and that the region's been impacted by Tropical Cyclone Debbie. So our aim is really to proactively support the recovery of coral in that region through targeted COTS control. And so the vessel will initially do some surveillance, and then and that will inform where we focus our control efforts. Finally, in the Mackay to Swains and Capricorn Bunker region, we, as I've already mentioned, we've identified reefs with quite high levels of COTS numbers and quite high severe outbreak status in the very far southern Swains. And the FMP surveillance suggests that those outbreaks have not spread or developed in the Capricorn Bunkers as of yet, although we do note that tourism operators in the Capricorn Bunkers are noticing more COTS than usual. So vessels working this region will target those high-value reefs in the southern Swains and continue to monitor the situation in the Capricorn Bunkers and provide assistance when possible and when necessary. So we have a lot of work going on in this program that's ongoing. We're in the process of finalizing work orders with those new vessel providers, identifying those high-value priority reefs across all these 5 operational regions, developing coordinated voyage schedules amongst those vessels. overseeing the work, health, and safety and training of those new vessel providers, and we're developing data capture tools, so applications that can be used on a tablet or a smartphone that the vessels can use to submit their data directly into the Eye on the Reef database to inform ongoing program planning and management. So how can you help? So you can report COTS that you see on the reef using the Eye on the Reef sightings app. That comes to us in our offices, and we consider that information when we're planning control efforts and voyages. You can also apply for a permit to conduct a control program yourself, so to go out and call COTS. We've made that process much more streamlined. You can do that using permits online. There's no assessment fee, and it's not location specific. So once you get the permit, you have the capacity to cull anywhere in the marine park, aside from the restricted zones, using the methods we've laid out in our COTS control guidelines. And we also have approved vinegar for use for control, because it's a really low-cost option and easily accessible to everyone. So if you do want to do a COTS program of your own, you have that readily available for you. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you, and I want to acknowledge that this program is really a joint effort between quite a number of people, including the Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service, the Association of Marine Park Tourism Operators, Reef and Rainforest Research Center, the NESP Environmental Science Program that provides the key science to inform how we do our work. And I thank you very much.